Goodbye, Peter.
Hey, you hang up on me now, you're not going to appreciate who I call next.
Excuse me?
I promised my people jobs. You promised me you could get this bill passed. You failed on your promise. I'm not going to fail on mine. So however you need to fix it, you figure it out. Otherwise, I go public with Kapaniak and the current editor.
You need to cool down and think very carefully about what you just said.
There's a scene between Congressman Russo, one of our guests today, and Underwood on last season's House of Cards. Alyssa, you were making a point in the break that I thought was kind of interesting, though, about the show and the story of Francis Underwood is not about anything ideological. It really is about the raw pursuit of power and climbing the ladder.
And I think one of the things that's strange about that is that ideology is tremendously powerful in Washington, and it causes people to behave in irrational ways instead of this sort of constant calculating, chess move vision of politics that the show puts on. And even people who aren't ideological, who aren't emotional about the issues, still recognize that ideology is a powerful tool, that there are constituencies to be manipulated, that, this language and the ability to build narratives are astonishingly useful. And I find it very hard to understand why Frank Underwood wants to be president, and even if he wants to be president and he's this master manipulator, why he's so resistant to ideology simply as a tool that would be useful.
Useful, or also there's the reality that the politicians are constrained by ideology so many times. They want to make these chess moves, but they know it'll offend the base. But Corey, you were saying too off the air, maybe a little more dramatic though, just focusing more on the pursuit of power from a standpoint of drama.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Richard III or Henry V, if you're trying to study the Battle of Agincourt, maybe reading Henry V would be helpful, but it wouldn't tell you exactly what happened during that battle. But what was interesting, what's worth telling as a story are the interpersonal power struggles.
Machiavellian. In political theory, we all read Machiavelli. But I think, Alyssa, that there's a difference. There are some folks who are very ideological, but there are some who aren't. So I think there's the variety in our political pool. There are people like Frank Underwood who probably don't care that much about ideology. It's about the power, and there are those who do care very much so. And I don't think ideology is necessarily irrational. It depends where you watch it from.
Absolutely.
I mean, a home district, being a crazy Tea Partier, is going to be very rational when you're up for re-election.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think ideology is mostly used by I would put it this way: the politicians who rise to the top tend not to be ideological themselves deep down, but know how to exploit it and manipulate it and use it to their advantage. And we don't see a whole
stories and use narratives. I mean, Frank Underwood never really speaks to the public. He always operates in these closed rooms, and we end up having, part of the story, and part of what makes House of Cards interesting, is that Frank Underwood has very little inner life. He has very little sense of who he is. He's sort of shoved down a lot of his individuality. What we saw, at his trip back to his college, these are parts of himself that he sort of systematically killed. And but he doesn't tell stories about himself to the public either. We don't see who he's inventing himself to be.
Well, it's also just the room he has to maneuver, the leeway he has to maneuver behind the scenes to make things happen. We keep talking about this chess analogy. Yeah, that part I struggle with, and given the realities of ideology and so many other factors in Washington. We have just a couple minutes left, but I want to talk too about just this idea of binge watching this show and these shows in general. It's like it came out Valentine's Day. I did my best to avoid spoilers. I finished it. I finished a 13-episode season, last night, and a lot of people do sort of the same thing, and this seems to be on the rise. You think back to these old shows, watching, a sitcom like Cheers, right? Didn't matter where in the season you started watching Cheers, you could miss the first 10 episodes, and then you could pick up the 11th, and then you'd have a good half an hour of laughs or whatever. Is Netflix and has this show, is House of Cards just changing what we expect from television? Do we now expect basically a long movie that's going to play out over a season, and we don't really want these individual knockoff episodes anymore?
Well, I think that Netflix is continuing on a tradition that HBO really sort of kicked off with The Sopranos, where, TV shows now tell these very long arc narratives. The difference is that, our serial storytelling used to be paced out for us. I mean, if you think back to Dickens or, Alexandre Dumas, who are writing serial stories, there's a long tradition of long arc serial storytelling where, each installment of the story both advances a long arc plot and our understanding of the characters while giving us something exciting. Netflix has just compressed that process in a way. There's been a long-running conversation about whether television has become more novelistic. I think a lot of that conversation centers on whether The Wire is the great American novel. Netflix is actually delivering television to us like a novel. It's, here are all of the chapters simultaneously. And I think that is interesting. I found...
Yeah, and Corey, you talked about this earlier. You talked about not wanting to binge watch it because you know the sort of the intricate work that goes into each one of these episodes. Is it more satisfying for you as an actor to be part of a show that really it's more novelistic? It's telling a story that spans an entire season as opposed to just like knockoff episodes that they could be watched in any order.
Yeah, definitely. And what was unique about my experience with this role was the arc that was encapsulated by one season and sort of knowing where we were going from the beginning, which is hard to do when on network TV where you're getting ratings and the plot can often be determined by what the ratings are. Right. We were isolated from that and insulated.
And did you know from the beginning where it was going to end up for your character in season 1, or did you find out episode to episode?
Yeah, that was part of the first meeting with David Fincher, which was good. It would have been a disappointing moment to open the script.
To find out, oh no, this is where it all ends for you. Well, you ended up here today, so it wasn't all a terrible place. But anyway, quick final thoughts after this. We'll be right back.